Welcome everybody to another episode of Reality Roundtable. I'm your host Jonathan Brown, and today we're going to be talking about something that's quite simple on the surface, but it's actually incredibly hard to practice in real life. And that right there is patience. Not the Instagram quote version of patience, and not just the wait and everything works out kind of patience. I'm talking about real patience. The kind that's tested when results are slow, when progress is quiet, and when nobody's clapping just yet. If you ever felt behind and wonder why things aren't clicking fast enough, if you've compared your chapter 2 to somebody else's chapter 10, this episode right here is for you. Patience isn't just about waiting, it's about who you become while you're waiting. And today, we're going to break down why patience is key and how it shapes your mindset, your discipline, and your character, and how learning patience can quietly change every area of your life. So sit back, take a breath, settle in, and let's talk about it. One of the biggest frustrations that people face early in any journey is the idea that they should already have everything figured out. But here's a simple truth that nobody tells you in the beginning: you don't have everything figured out, and you don't know everything at first, and you're not supposed to. When you start something new, whether that's a new career, whether that's your fitness journey, whether that's trying to be a content creator, whether that's starting your own business, or if you're trying to learn a new skill. You're simply stepping into unfamiliar territory, and expecting mastery immediately is like expecting to read fluently before learning the alphabet. Patience gives you permission to actually be a beginner, and it allows you to ask questions without shame, to make mistakes without quitting, and to learn without rushing. Impatience says, I should already be better. Patience says, I'm learning and that's enough for today. And that mindset alone will keep you in the game longer than raw talent ever could. Almost any meaningful goal that you set in life has something in common. It requires a process. There are steps, layers, and seasons. We all love the highlight reels, but we forget about the years that led up to them. The problem isn't that progress is slow. The problem is that we underestimate how long things actually take. Patience helps you respect the process instead of resenting it. Because the process is where discipline is built, where confidence is earned, and where consistency is tested. If everything came instantly, growth would actually be shallow. Patience reminds you that slow progress is still progress, and is often the most sustainable kind of progress. And I'll give you an example. It's honestly an example that a lot of people can relate to. Imagine you're reading a really, really long book. When you take a first look at it and you see how many pages it is, say like this is over 200, 300 pages. When you first read it, it may, in your mind, you're thinking, oh man, it's going to take a long time for me to finish this book. But with each page that you read, you see the book size start to shrink more and more. And the next thing you know, after all the reading you've done, you end up finishing the book. So that right there is an example of trusting the process and being patient. And patience doesn't just affect what you achieve, it also affects how you show up. It affects your demeanor, your energy, and your reactions. Impatience causes frustration, short tempers, and anxiety. Patience creates calm, composure, and clarity. When you're patient, you're less reactive and more intentional. You don't panic at setbacks, and you don't spiral at delays, and you don't self sabotage at the first sign of resistance. And people tend to notice that. Patience makes you easier to trust, easier to work with, and also easier to respect. And it quietly matures you. Rush thinking leads to rush decisions. And rush decisions are often expensive, emotionally, financially, and mentally. Patience slows your mind just enough to let logic catch up with emotion. And instead of asking, why isn't this working yet? You start asking, what can I do to improve right now? Instead of reacting, you start to reflect. And patience gives you the space to analyze, adjust, and move forward with intention. Clear thinking thrives in patient environments. And here's something to understand: not everyone in the world has patience, and that's okay. But it does mean something. It means that patient people often tend to go further, not because they're smarter or they're more gifted, but because they tend to last longer and they tend to trust the process. And impatient people tend to quit early, switch paths constantly, and chase shortcuts. Patient people tend to stay the course. They tend to commit, they endure boredom, and they push past plateaus. And over time, patience becomes a competitive advantage. And patience allows you to build a foundation. You can't adjust what doesn't exist. You can't redefine what you've never started. Patience keeps you moving along long enough to create something real, something that you can actually improve on. Instead of restarting every time, it's not perfect. You make small corrections. And progress compounds when you stay. And when it comes to patience, one of the biggest enemies of that is comparison. We assume that timelines should match, and they won't. People tend to have different backgrounds, different resources, different responsibilities, and different starting points in life. Patience teaches you to respect your own path, to focus on your steps instead of someone else's pace. Your journey doesn't need to make sense to anyone else, it only needs to make sense to you. So just be honest with yourself about that. And also, patience isn't situational, it's actually very transferable. Once you develop it in one area, it tends to spill over in other areas, whether that be the gym, like I said earlier, reading a book, if you're trying to go to school to learn more skills or to get your education in a specific field, starting a business, or actually learning a new skill. You stop expecting instant results and you start trusting consistency. That mindset will change everything in your life. And when you're patient, comparison tends to lose its grip on you. You're too focused on your own growth to obsess over someone else's success. You measure progress against who you were yesterday, not who someone else is today. There's a unique gratitude that only comes after patience. When you've waited, when you've struggled, and when you've stayed consistent, the reward feels deeper, not just because of the outcome, but because of who you became during the process. And patience makes the finish line more meaningful. But before we go deeper, let's reset. If you're still listening right now, that tells me something: that you're willing to sit with ideas instead of rushing past them. That alone is patience. And what does patience look like when life isn't theoretical? When it's personal? Patience feels uncomfortable because it removes distractions. When progress is slow, you're left alone with your own thoughts. And doubt tends to get louder, comparison tends to creep in, and impatience starts negotiating with shortcuts. But patience forces honesty. It asks you, do you actually want this? Or do you want the outcome that comes from this? Some people say that they're being patient, but they're actually quitting internally. They're waiting, but not working. Real patience is active. It shows up daily, it practices, it studies, and it improves quietly. Waiting without effort is avoidance, and patience with effort is discipline. Slow seasons tend to be very uncomfortable, but they are powerful. They build resilience, they teach you how to keep showing up without applause, and anyone can stay motivated when the results are fast. But patience proves who you are when they are not. Boredom is part of the mastery, repetition, routine, and unsexy progress. Patience allows you to stay consistent when the excitement fades, and that's where the real skill is built. Patience teaches self trust. You stop panicking every time progress is slow. You start believing if I stay consistent, I'll eventually figure this out. And that confidence tends to compound. Failure teaches patience like nothing else. It tempts you to restart, rebrand, or just run away from the problem. But patience asks you, what can that teach me? Failure handled patiently becomes instruction, not identity. And patience tends to regulate your emotions. You don't tend to spiral, you don't explode, and you don't internalize every setback. You respond instead of react. That emotional control spills into relationships, work, and leadership. Ironically, rushing often slows your progress. Skipping steps creates weak foundations, and patience ensures durability. What you build slowly will last longer. And patience requires humility, being unseen, being unrecognized, and being early. Most people quit here, but this stage actually protects you. It gives you time to grow before the actual pressure arrives. Success isn't speed, it's sustainability. Anybody can be a one hit wonder, but what can you produce after that one hit though? Patience shifts your goal from fast wins to long term alignment. You stop chasing validation and you start building value. And at this point, it's not just a podcast. This is honestly a conversation. If you're still here, you're not listening casually anymore. You're reflecting. And the final part of this episode will be about integration, how patience shows up when life applies pressure. Some seasons feel frozen. No visible progress, no feedback, no momentum. Patience in these moments isn't optimism, it's endurance. You keep showing up, not because it feels good, but because you decided that what you're doing actually matters. Most of your growth actually happens in private. The early mornings, the late nights, and the quiet repetition. Patience allows you to work without validation, and that builds internal confidence. Confidence that doesn't collapse when praise disappears. And we live in a culture obsessed with speed, fast money, fast results, and fast success, where urgency without direction leads to burnout. Patience gives urgency a filter, and it helps you move intentionally instead of impulsively. Patience doesn't mean inaction, patience means timed action. You learn to recognize when to push and when to pause. That discernment only comes from experience. Patience might matter most here, with people, with communication, and with growth. Not everyone evolves at your pace. Patience allows connection without control. Some people mistake patience for complacency, but patience is actually strategic. It's choosing longevity over the quick reaction. You don't explain your pace, but you protect it. And doubt from other people tends to test patience deeply, especially when you don't have the results yet. Patience lets you stay grounded. You don't argue, you build. Big visions take time. and time can feel lonely. Patience keeps you steady when encouragement is scarce. You learn to self motivate. Patience separates who you are from what you produce. You stop tying your self worth to speed. You become grounded, and that stability changes how you move throughout life. And one day, you'll look back. Patience ensures that you won't regret rushing past the lessons that you learned. And you'll be able to see the growth, not the gaps. And if there's one takeaway from this episode, let it be this: that patience compounds and it builds over time. It compounds skill, it compounds your character, and it compounds your confidence. You don't need to hurry, but you do need to stay the course. And thank you for giving this time. And thank you for choosing growth over speed. And also, thank you for listening to another episode of the Reality Roundtable. I'm your host, Jonathan Brown, and I'll be back next week with another episode at 12 p.m. sharp. Thank you, and have a great day.